Welcome back to Regular Guys Outdoors. I'm Chris. This is going to be a long overdue review of the Winchester SXP here in 20 gauge. When I originally bought this gun, it had a 26-inch barrel with the same camo pattern on it, which is the mossy oak bottomland, and it's very nicely applied and looks very good. Now on that first barrel, when I went to take out the choke that was in it as it came out of the package, it would not come out. It would not come out at all. So I contacted Winchester and they had me send it back in on their dime, and it came back with a new barrel, or at least a fixed one. There's no serial number on the barrel, so I don't know if it was the same one or not. But anyway, it came back and the barrel worked fine. However, what I did notice was that the vent rib on it had a slight bend in one spot, and it was such that if you lined up the bead on the flat part of the receiver, it shot right where it should. But if you tried to line up the bead on this very back part of the rib and use that as your kind of your windage, then it would shoot off to the right because the rib was bent. So it had like a little bend in it. As you got closer to the receiver, it had a bend in it. And you can see it on this barrel too. I ended up selling that barrel off with the full disclosure of how that is. So I sold that barrel off because I found this barrel, which is a 24-inch barrel, and it is black parkerized. So I wanted it more like a turkey gun, and so I got the 24-inch barrel. So right now it has the Indian Creek Black Diamond Strike in it, the 555 choke, and it's wearing the Magnum Gobble Dot sights from True Glow. Magnum Gobble Dot Pro Series, I think it is. I got to use this in Delaware this year because I had it dialed in with federal third-degree ammo. Because of the laws in Delaware, I couldn't use just number 9 TSS. So anyway, that's the history of this gun. It's been long overdue. You've seen it in a lot of reviews. It shot a lot of patterns for different turkey chokes and turkey load tests that we've done here on the channel. And so this gun's been around for a number of years now at this point. What's interesting about this gun is it is basically a knockoff, or maybe a modern rendition of the Winchester model 1300/1200/120. The lineage on the 1300 versus the SXP is very evident when you take them apart. The internal parts are very similar, the same. If you look down right in here, your guess that's your ejector spring. It's like a flat spring, very much look the same. So it's very similar in design. The parts do not interchange, but it's the same design, if you will, if that makes sense. So it's the same design, they operate the same. So Winchester used to call the 1300 the speed pump, and that's because of this. So the SXP does the same thing. When you shoot this gun, as soon as you pull the trigger, the action wants to open. And that's the same thing on this guy. As soon as you pull that trigger, it wants to open. So it's the speed pump. So Winchester always advertised that as the fastest shooting shotgun, or pump action shotgun that there is. And this model 1300/1200/Ranger 120, and probably some Sears Roebuck and Western Auto pump shotguns that were all on this design, are kind of similar to, sort of, real loose, but the safety is in the same place on this Winchester Model 12. So Winchester has been kind of having this similar design from an ergonomics standpoint for over 100 years now at this point. So I like the safety in front of the trigger guard. I think that's a very good place for it to be. It's very ergonomic, so you can be sitting like this and then you're duck blind, and as soon as the ducks come, pow, boom. So I like that in front of the trigger guard as a home defense gun or something. you're right here, you go from safety off to trigger, safety off to trigger. So I like that about these guns. I like where that safety is. Like I said, I got to use this in Delaware this year, so I was there like 5 days or so. So I got a lot of walking around time with this bad boy. And what I find is that it's very front heavy. Very front heavy. Like you've got to really be out here in front of the receiver for it not to fall forward. So I wasn't crazy about that, because then when I add my Tacticam up front, it really starts to get quite heavy, or quite front heavy. It's a fairly lightweight gun because it's got an aluminum receiver and synthetic stock and forearm, so it's not a heavy gun by any stretch of the imagination. It seems weighted forward, and that wasn't, I didn't care for that too much. And with that balance, let's compare the balance of this Winchester to my little Mossberg that I like so much. So this guy, with its short little barrel, it does not feel front heavy. Whereas this guy, you holding it, it's front heavy. If I kind of put the receiver where the receiver meets the barrel at the same place, it kind of wants to fall forward on the SXP, whereas the Mossy just sits there. It's not front heavy. I got to come back a little ways. So that's that. Very minor nitpick right there. So something I think is important on a shotgun, especially one you're using as like a turkey gun where you're going to shoot it more like a rifle off your knee or something, is the trigger pull. So let's go ahead and measure this one. So that measured off the chart. Let's do it again. Again, off the chart, roughly 10-ish pounds. Doesn't feel it in the hand. Let's change the angle of the gauge pull, and I'll tell you why that is here in a second. Probably about 8.5 pounds on that one. So the triggers on all three of these shotguns, SXP 1300 Model 12, over 100 years, the trigger design is very similar. If you could think of my hand as a candy cane, or my fingers, my index finger and thumb as a candy cane, the trigger kind of release is up around the tip of my finger, and so you've got this candy cane shaped trigger that the whole thing has to pivot, or actually it has to pivot up. So when you pull on the trigger, which is my thumb, the whole thing has to pivot up. And we'll do a little better close-up right here and show you the trigger on each one of these. But the whole thing has to go up. So you're not really so much pulling back on the trigger as you are, you need to kind of pull up diagonally on the trigger to get it to go in. So if you pull back, it's super heavy because you're actually trying to make it rise with your finger, whereas if you kind of actually push kind of diagonal up on the trigger, it's lighter because you're actually going in the direction that the trigger wants to go. So I'm not a fan of that. So the trigger feels funny. So when you're pulling it with your finger, it doesn't feel like an 8 or 10 pound trigger, but it does have that little bit of a weirdness to it, and so that's kind of goofy. Now, a couple of the things I like, which is why I bought the gun. So the barrel is in Vector Plus thread, which means the barrel is overbored about what would that be, a hundredth of an inch. A normal 12 gauge is like a 730 bore, whereas the Invector Plus 12 gauge is about a 742. So that's a 1200th of an inch difference. So the bore starts out bigger. And if for whatever reason that makes it shoot really good patterns. I find that the Invector Plus barrel systems from Browning and Winchester shoot very good patterns. So this Invector Plus barrel gives you don't have to choke your barrel down as tight as you would numerically. It's still the same kind of constriction, because constriction and choke diameter are two different things. On my little Mossberg right here, if I liked a 575 choke in here, and I do for a lot of reasons, then you would like a 585 in this, because that's about the similar relationship between barrel and constriction at the choke. So you don't need a 575 to match this, because a 575 in this is going to be more like a 565 in this, which is actually what's in this right now. The other reason why I like this on paper is because the barrel is chrome lined. I like that for weather resistance. And the bolt is black chromed. I like that for weather resistance. So if you get rained on, you've got an aluminum receiver, you got a chrome lined bore, and it's really easy to take this gun apart. I'm not going to show you. There's probably 1,000 videos on YouTube showing you how to take apart an SXP, but it's pretty darn simple. Then you can take the guts out of the mag tube, clean your mag tube out, and make sure nothing's going to rust inside. Trigger group out, spray it down with some oil, bang, throw it back in, wipe your bolt down, punch something through your barrel, wipe everything down, boom, you're done. It's really not that complicated of a mechanism. It's the same mechanism basically as this guy. So it's very simple, very easy, and it already comes with some amount of weather prevention or weather resistance to it. Now, what I did not do when I bought this years ago was see how it shoots to its factory bead up front. So it's a brass bead up front. So I'm going to head into the mountains and we're going to shoot this. I'm going to take the sights off and I'm going to shoot this bad boy with just the bead on the front, and we're going to see how close to point of impact it is to the point of aim with this bead. Now, I've had the 12 gauge version of this gun, and it's been sold off years ago, but you've seen it on the channel if you've seen some of the older 12 gauge turkey load videos. But it didn't have any weirdness on the rib, and this one's, all three barrels I've had on this guy have. So maybe it's a 20 gauge issue. But the 12 gauge shot high, and by high I mean if you're aiming at a target at about 35 yards, shooting it like you would for a turkey load, it's going to shoot about 80% of the pattern above your aim point, which might be fine for shooting ducks, where you can kind of float the duck or float the pheasant or float the quail just a little bit above your bead. But I don't like that for a turkey gun. I want to shoot a pattern around my bead. Where I put the bead, I want the pattern to be around the bead. I want the bead to be the center of my pattern. But having said that, almost all my turkey guns have these adjustable sights on them, so no matter where the pattern is, I can dial them in and get it the way I want it to be. So with that, we'll see you up in the mountains. All right, we got two targets at 27 yards. We're going to shoot a Remington Nitro on the right and this old Federal red box on the left. Both are number 5. Not that any of that's relevant. We're just wanting to see how this shoots to the bead. Point of aim, point of impact. So that's the test here today. All right, here's our results with the SXP. Nitro turkey on the right. That's pretty close to centered. I'd say the center's about right there. That ain't too bad. Ain't too bad at all. Center's about right there. So the SXP there, it shot pretty good. I was not expecting that. I was expecting it to shoot a bit higher than that. But that one Federal load, it shot that a little higher than it shot the Remington load. But
That's not bad at all, not too bad. I just find that today's shotguns, it's hard to get them to shoot to the bead. I mean, you got to play around with loads and chokes and you still might not even come close, which is kind of a shame. It's like the old Remingtons have that dialed in, and for some reason modern manufacturing can't seem to figure it out. And I'm talking, I know guns that are $1,500 that don't shoot to the bead, they shoot high. I don't know. But anyway, I think that gun is going to go up for sale on the used market somewhere. I'm going to part with it because it is my fourth favorite pump action 20 gauge for turkeys. And I don't need 4. I don't even need the 3 that that I'm keeping. But the little Mossy, the little Remington, and my original Mossy, the New Haven 500 CT or whatever that's called. The only way I would suggest buying the SXP is if you can put it in your hands and look to see if it has that rib issue. If it has the rib issue, then obviously go for another model. The forward heavy that I don't like, the front balance, and the trigger's not an issue because you don't feel the weight of the trigger when you're shooting the gun. The geometry is a little bit goofy, so if you're already used to a Winchester 1200, 1300, 1400, and I think they even had a 1500, the 14 and the 1500s were semi-autos back in the day, I don't think it'd be an issue. You're already used to that trigger. The Winchesters that do intrigue me still, though, the little youth model SXP pumps with the little wooden stocks, and I believe they come in 18, 20, and 22-inch barrels. So imagine the little wooden stock with a 20-inch barrel. I bet there wouldn't be a balance issue because you'd have less barrel up front and more weight in the back with the wood stock. So that would still tempt me. And here we got yet another ATV coming by. This was not an issue 3 years ago. Side rant here. Some of the places where I knew where the turkeys were in Colorado are now just overrun with side-by-sides, quads, motorcycles, friggin' apartment complex style campers and junk like that. So the turkeys aren't there, and I don't know where they went to. So that's another reason why those things just bother me and annoy me. But anywho, hope you liked this video. If you did, give us that thumbs up, hit the subscribe button down there, and as always, thanks for watching.